tonight to share our passion for our city's history. Welcome to past Mayor Jim Clark is with us tonight. Thank you for joining us, Jim.
Paul Jacobs.
Mayor Paul Jacobs is here with us tonight. We have Scott Houston from the Department of Water from our region. We love Scott. Keep the water flowing, Scott. I'm going to turn it over to our Vice President of Programs, Claire Denk, and I'll see you in a bit.
Welcome back to many of you. I think this is going to be a really fun program, especially as summer's approaching. We're all thinking about traveling, and so airport seems like an appropriate topic, I thought. Reminder, before anything else, please silence your cell phones. I forgot to do that last time, and there are lots of phones ringing off. So please remember to silence your cell phones. And again, the raffle, as Hope mentioned, be sure you have a ticket. You can win Mark Wanamaker's book on early aviation. So we're going to start with Hope speaking tonight, our Culver City Historical Society president, who's also served the society in many other ways over the years. And for those of you who don't know, she's the third generation of her family to have worked in the motion picture industry. Her grandfather was a property man. Her father, who's here tonight, Dennis, was a property master, and she continued the family tradition as a property master on lots of films that you may have heard of, including Air Force One, The Aviator. More aviation. She worked on The Aviator, so she probably knows. She did some aviation research for that. Zodiac, X-Men First Class, and Big Little Lies not long ago. But and also she has lived here her entire life in Culver City. She's a graduate of Culver City High School, and overall, over the years, her family has lived in Culver City on Mentone Avenue for 75 years. Is that correct? Okay. 80. Okay. Dad says 80. Okay. Anyway, now retired, she still serves on several local committees, recently formed the Property Masters Guild, and was recently awarded the Legacy of Service Award by the Culver City Chamber of Commerce. Just recently. So we'll take it away, and then Mark will speak after that. Thank you.
This was a program that Mark and I have been talking about for a long time, because when I found out, I'd always kind of heard we had an airport, and I thought, really? Where was it? Why didn't we keep it? Why did we have, what happened? And so we've done it. We pulled it off. So here we go. Did you know Culver City once had an airport? Culver City and its founders were at the forefront of two of Southern California's greatest and largest industries, the motion picture and aviation. On September 22nd, 1928, Harry H. Culver, our city's founder, declared in the Star Press of Muncie, Indiana, "The time is here when the city with a community airport will forge ahead of those cities in which such facilities are lacking, and the city with greater number of airports will acquire greater populations." March 22nd, 1927, the Los Angeles City Council, not Culver City's, but the Los Angeles City Council authorized City Attorney Stevens to present to the California legislature an amendment to existing laws legalizing the establishment of municipal airports. This will permit cities to acquire land for airports by condemnation, purchase, or to receive donations of land. Also, the Los Angeles Chamber of Commerce recommended a municipal airport in Los Angeles. The council was hard at work considering sites, the legal and financial aspects of the airport project. This amendment to the state law clears away any legal questions regarding the rights of cities to acquire land for airport purposes. The resolution was unanimously adopted. Flight and aviation's race to the sky gave new means for good commerce, travel. mail delivery, recreation, motion pictures, commerce, and air shows. I will not bore you with the many articles I read about Harry Culver, the then president of the Los Angeles Realty Board, and his cross-country business trips he made during 1927 and 1928 by plane. But he stated many times that using aviation as his means for travel versus traveling by train or by automobile allowed him to conduct his business in a faster way with quicker results. He could travel to multiple cities and even states in one day versus weeks. This allowed for shorter trips away from Culver City. Okay, so here's a little fun tidbit. As we know, Colonel Lindbergh made his historic flight from New York to Paris in his plane, the Spirit of St. Louis, in March of 1927. He was one of America's greatest international heroes to date. In September of 1927, which happens to be, while Colonel Lindbergh was touring America, Culver City was celebrating its 10th year of celebration as a municipality. Lindbergh paid a visit to the Southland and to our little city. Culver City declared it Lindbergh Day with a huge celebration, a commemorative stamp for anyone who mailed a letter that day. And the best news was schools and businesses were closed. Primarily because the Chamber of Commerce and local residents had planned for a parade for our anniversary, which included many of the business members of the community, residents, and our students. With the news of Lindbergh's arrival to the Southland, this celebration became twofold. Lindy was entertained by our city's Mayor Reeve Hope, Marion Davies, and MGM's Louis B. Mayer, and many other local motion picture and city officials. And if that was not enough, 3 days later, following the inauguration of the Los Angeles to San Diego line of the MUDEX Aerial Transportation Company, Charles Lindbergh piloted the inaugural flight in a Ford tri-motor plane, which Harry Culver, Charles Lindbergh, and Benjamin Bledsoe were in attendance. Which, those names are all pretty familiar, right? Yeah. During one of Harry Culver's cross-country multi-state trips in October of 1927, in many local papers quoted Culver to say, "The progressive community builder of today will first provide the airports and follow with population." This national movement for airports and aviation was sparking up everywhere, and I mean everywhere. Back here in Culver City, Harry Culver had now purchased his own plane. And Mr. Lindblade, president of the Culver City Realty Board, had selected a 500-acre tract, which he had hoped to be developed into a commercial airport owned by the municipality of Culver City. In the Venice Vanguard, a local paper dated February 9, 1928, I read this: "Airport for Culver City, Mayor's plan. Mayor Reeve Hope at the special committee meeting shared plans to take over the Ferris track site, an unincorporated part of Los Angeles, not yet annexed into Culver City. Hangars will be constructed and equipment obtained to meet modern aviation needs. The track will be purchased by the city, taking an option on the adjoining acreage. This area was adjacent to Mesmer City, land owned by Joseph Mesmer that was currently under development." Culver City had an airport in their sights, and there was a young man that could help them. Frank Baker, a 20-year-old Pasadena aviator, the son of wealthy shoe store chain operator C.H. Baker, some of you might remember Baker Shoes, became owner-operator, and with his partner Bob Blair, head of operations, opened the Frank Baker Field on April 8, 1928. The airport had 2 sod runways shaped in an L, with the longest part running 2,400 feet. It was laid out so that you landed from the east and took off from the north. Its first hangar was erected on the west end of the field. They also opened the Frank Baker Aircraft Company of Culver City and became the Los Angeles dealers for Waco Planes, and they were also the distributorship for the Buell Air Sedan, which was a 5-seater cabin biplane powered with a Wright Whirlwind motor. This state-of-the-art plane carried a 1,000-pound payload with a top speed of 120 miles per hour and a cruising speed of 100 miles per hour. The pilot's cockpit was separate from the passenger compartment. Both compartments were heated for high altitudes and cold territories. Frank hired Jack Miller as his sales manager for the distributorship. Baker and Blair furnished the motion picture industry with many planes for filming. On one of these films was for First National Pictures entitled Lilac Time, starring Gary Cooper and Colleen Moore. 19 planes were used in the dogfight scenes and air work. Frank also installed a rack at the airport for production to mount their planes while filming close-ups of the actors in simulated flight. Next, the two partners, Frank and Bob, installed beacons on the field for pilots to find the airstrip for night landings. And from time to time, Frank enjoyed the action of being a stunt pilot. Now that's not Frank, but I just love that picture.
I think that's a fox.
Yes, it is a fox. Flight was everyone's new thrill, as you can see, and the daredevil's excitement, especially for the Hollywood community. In between filming, Bob Blair and his wife Margaret, who was also a flyer, ran the operations for passenger and charter flights. Culver City, the heart of Screenland, was home to many local movie studios. Blair and Margaret decided to open the Blair School for Flying. They taught many notable celebrities in flying and piloting planes. Some students included Clark Gable, Jimmy Stewart, Ruth Chatterton, and Henry Fonda. And then through my research, you know, it was really cool seeing Henry Fonda and Jimmy Stewart, longtime friends, both pilots, both serving in World War II. Jimmy Stewart actually flew in Vietnam. He continued to fly. And then there's great pictures of them with these model planes. I guess they were really into the little model plane flying thing. So they had a wonderful friendship, and it was so wonderful when I was doing this research to find out some of this. June 7th, 1928, the headline reads this: Mayor of Hub City, now that is our nickname, sponsors an airport. Taking advantage of the city of Los Angeles' inability to agree on an airport development and site, Mayor Hawks stated that Culver City may beat Los Angeles in building a commercial field. Hope declaring that Culver City's municipal airport will soon turn night into day, and that Colonel Lindbergh will find a hospitable night welcome here when he returns to this country again. Reeve Hope also disclosed immediate projected improvement of landing and flying facilities at the Hub community. Hope toured 11 separate airports in Southern California, gathering data relating to field planning, modern lighting, location in relation to traffic and air travel lines, and ground conditions. This information gathered by the mayor was presented to a special committee of citizens working with the city government in establishing and developing the field. Moving quickly, within 1 week's time, night lights at Culver City Baker Airport were officially turned on by Mayor Hawk on Saturday, June 17, 1928. The first passenger to land at night on the newly lit field was Dr. Robert Langley of Beverly Hills, with Frank Baker piloting the plane. Seems fitting that Baker, owner-operator of the airport, was the first to christen the night light. Just 8 days later, though, Frank Baker, known as the man who stunted for fun, was reported doing stunts for a motion picture while piloting from the rear cockpit, flying over and around the Fox Hills Country Club area. Upon his return to the airport, flying at a low altitude, he was doing a role known as the falling leaf, then suddenly went into a tailspin and at impact buried its nose into the ground. But because Baker was piloting from the rear cockpit, he did not die instantly. Suffering multiple fractures and internal injuries, Frank was rushed to the Culver City Hospital, where Dr. Rhodes, physician at the time, which was a little teeny building where there's an Asian restaurant now by the doctors, by the Culver Theater, and I guess that would be S&W. There's that little square building. That was the original Culver Hospital. Somebody might have been born there in this room. Frank would have celebrated his 21st birthday just 4 days later on June 29th. Bob Blair, his partner, suffered a devastating blow with the death of his partner. And by the end of the year, in December of 1928, the Buell Company and the airport operations were sold. Now here's a funny thing. President Woodrow Wilson's son-in-law, LA attorney William G. McAdoo Sr., backed his son with $100,000 for the purchase and development of Baker Field. William G. McAdoo Jr., a veteran flyer in the U.S. Army during World War I, stated they are negotiating for several large passenger planes which could carry up to 25 passengers, being built in the East with the idea of making our field the western terminus for this new continental airline. I thought that was pretty interesting. Both father and son agree that air travel is the coming thing, and they wanted to get in on the ground floor. I read that prior to the acquisition of the Baker Field, the young partners, McAdoo, McManus, another familiar name, and Lansing Tias, had been trying to get something off the ground for passenger service under the name of Flying Incorporated. And this was at the Clover Field, known now as the Santa Monica Airport. But with the passing of Frank Baker and the financial backing from McAdoo's father, this was an opportunity they needed to own their own airport in Culver City. This new partnership, McAdoo's and Albert McManus Jr., lieutenant in the Royal Air Corps, opened their new company under the name of the Culver City Airport, Inc., changed the name, and painted Culver City Airport on the roof of the hangar for all flyers to see. I'm not sure about the day-to-day operations of the field. The research is light, but I did find articles reflecting during the better part of 1929, these partners were interested in breaking the flying endurance and air-to-air refueling records held on the East Coast. This was the base for the Reinhardt-Mendel endurance flight. But it seems the partners got into some financial scrapes for non-payment of 5 new monoplanes that were ordered and financed through the California Standard Finance Company. These planes would be auctioned off by the sheriff's office for non-payment. The partners had the airport for a little over a year, and by the beginning of 1930, the Culver City Airport, Inc. would be looking for a buyer for the operation, and their partnership would be dissolved. Culver City and Frank Baker's original airport were now unoccupied. But here's the good news. When a plan to purchase the field operations from McAdoo fell through, the potential buyer referred this opportunity to wealthy aviatrix Margaret Perry. Margaret Perry, an avid horse person, had found her new passion in flying. She attended the Curtis School of Flying in Garden City, Long Island, and was a member of the Long Island Aviation Country Club. In 1929, Margaret performed in the first National Women's Air Derby from California to Cleveland, which Will Rogers coined the Powder Puff Derby. She competed in other air derbies across the nation, and Miss Perry was very well known in aviation aviation circles. She was also governor and charter member of the Women's International Association of Aeronautics. She had competed with notable women flyers in the day, such as Pancho Barnes, Ruth Elder, Bobby Trout, and Amelia Earhart. She was one of 16 women in the nation to hold a government transport pilot's license. And in 1929, she had entered the all-women's transcontinental air race, which began out of Santa Monica, but she was forced to withdraw when she contracted typhoid fever. California, with its near-perfect daily weather, allowed for year-round flying. All around the state, new airports and airfields were being carved into the landscape. Hollywood dreamers were continuing to discover how to incorporate flying in their new films that could excite moviegoers. This was the era of the silent, blockbuster World War I motion pictures. This surge in Hollywood created an explosion of opportunity for both men and women flyers. Margaret decided to come west. Margaret relocated from New York City to Beverly Hills, California, with 400+ logged flying hours. Margaret began working as a stunt pilot for the motion picture industry. Maybe Margaret was in the right place at the right time when Culver City wanted their airport up and running again, and Margaret wanted to be a part of it. Culver City was known for being a progressive airport with many female flyers. Margaret told the LA Times, "The public does not realize how many girls and women in and near Los Angeles hold pilot's licenses." A survey done in 1930 by the Curtiss Wright Company showed that California was home to 57 of the country's 220 licensed women pilots. And of 38 were residents of Southern California, and 17 of them lived in Los Angeles. So around March 15, 1930, Margaret signed a 1-year's lease with the city of Culver City with an option to renew for 5 years. The Culver City Airport was now hers. Written in all the papers across the nation, hands down, this ad had different titles, different things, but this ran in Boston, in New York, in Chicago, in Tempe, Arizona, everywhere. This was big news. So written in the papers all across the nation, Culver City was suddenly awakened to the fact that her corporation fostered the first airport in the United States and possibly in the world to be owned and operated by a woman flyer in her own name. LA Times, March 30th, 1930, Margaret is quoted, "My acquisition of the Culver City Airport was quite by accident. I never dreamed of using my flying experience in a commercial way until I was offered an opportunity to take over the airport. And I don't believe that the party who made the offer thought that I would really take it. And certainly, no one could have convinced me 2 weeks ago that I would be running an airport today. But here I am. I own my own plane. Why not an airport?" But there was still much that Margaret needed to do. Her primary aim was a flying school. Her first step was to get the field into shape. So she purchased a tractor and leveler to smooth out the 2 large runways and hired local labor to remove the overgrown brush so that she could begin to grade the runways. Several acres next to the grounds were acquired and added to the airport. She personally made repairs to the existing hangars and added another hangar to the property. The airport now had housing capacity for 9 ships with extra hangar space for privately owned and visiting aviators. For her personal use, Miss Perry owned a Wrights-motored Spartan. Miss Perry opened her flight school, which was the first woman-conducted flight school for women in the nation. Her instructor, William R. Randall, used 2 of the fleet models, the type used in military training, as school training ships. With Her planes tuned up, greased, oiled, she was almost ready to open. Her revamp of the airport continued by upgrading the operations offices. She added a gas and oil building with fueling stations, which you can see in this photo. She is signing her contract with Union Oil, which was hand-delivered by plane by a representative from Union Oil. This secured her agreement with Union Oil for the oil and gasoline needed in the daily operations. She also built mechanical shops for repairs and maintenance of not only her fleet, but also customers. She made sure she built a concession booth for the crowds attending air derbies and events held at the airport, and placed field markers on the field to guide the pilots. Last but not least, Margaret opened a little attractive clubhouse where all women flyers were welcome. It had a spacious lounge area, a card room, men and women's locker rooms, and a kitchen facility. Upon her opening day, she intends to have her 15 transport licensed sisters on the field for an all-woman air service. The airport, that's opening day. The airport was inaugurated, the Margaret Perry Airport, on May 9th of the same year. A celebration of flying events, guests of honor, over 100 aircraft, which included planes sent by the Army from Long Beach and Marshfield, the Continental Air Express, and 30 women flyers and other local airport representatives and private flyers, making the crowd an estimated 6,000. Margaret possessed many documents of tribute and was a celebrated aviator. She continued to form all-women air derbies and air circuses, and in 1931, along with her fellow female aviators, the local Southwest chapter of the 99s was formed, and the Women's Stunt Pilot Association at her airport in Culver City. The first president of this growing national organization was Margaret's close friend, internationally known pilot Amelia Earhart, who made history in 1932 when she was the first woman flying solo on a nonstop flight from New York to England. Margaret succeeded as president from 1933 until 1935. By 1936, at the end of her lease with the city of Culver City, Margaret moved back to her home in New York and became the New York, New Jersey chapter president of the 99s. After the death of Amelia Earhart, Margaret formed the Amelia Earhart Memorial Scholarship Fund and served until her death in 1951 as a permanent trustee. This scholarship fund continues to award female pilots today. So now we meet a man by the name of Pete Lehmann. Pete Lehmann, Pete Lehmann, who conducted flight training at the Culver City Airport in the 30s, soon took over the airport operations. Pete, a World War I veteran with a passion for flight, got his pilot's license in 1928. Pete ran the airport operations and flight school from the mid-1930s until about 1941, where research shows he purchased the operations of the airport and ran it for the rest of the airport's life. The Culver City Airport was not depicted at all on the 1942 USGS topo map, but that may have been because of the censorship due to wartime security concerns. I came across his 1942 World War II draft card, which stated that he and his wife Harriet resided at 4054 Madison Avenue in Apartment C in Culver City. Just 2 miles from the center of Culver City, Pete continued to teach celebrities, local residents, and city officials to fly, including Julie Lugo, Sarah's Aunt Jean Barker. Pete's protege, an airplane flight instructor, Beryl Erickson, would later become a noted test pilot for Consolidated and Lockheed. They also helped famed aviators with their flying careers. As the airport continued to grow, Pete sold planes, new and used, and provided hangar space for a fee. The airport developed the name Lehmann, meaning lake in German, due to the constant flooding that when it rained. My father remembers the flooding at Slauson and Sepulveda near the airport. My grandpa used to take, he said what did you say, Dad? You would help pull people out of the mud? Stuff like that when they flood out. And then as a child, my grandpa used to take him to watch, during World War II, to watch the planes taking off and landing, at the airstrip. In the spring of 1949, the Goodyear blimp offered aerial sightseeing from the Culver City Airport, a 20-minute flight costing $5 for adults and $2.50 for children. But this was short-lived, due to the fact Pete Lehmann's airport closed for good in 1950. Post-World War II developers Richard Diller and Irving L. Kalsman, there's a couple of names, we have a couple of streets named after these people, began developing all around Southern California and the nation. Locally, they developed Beverlywood, Whittier Estates, Van Nuys Gardens, Encino Gardens, the Sunkissed Gardens in Compton, and Sunkissed Park in Culver City. They were building affordable homes for returning GIs. And these gentlemen purchased Pete's Airport and the adjoining properties for $6,500,000, creating our Sunkissed Park community. They built 602 2- and 3-bedroom homes, 5 different floor plans with a price tag, okay, I get this, with a price tag of $10,700 to $1,100. And veterans could purchase with $840 down, plus impounds. Monthly payments could start at $55 for principal and interest. Right? Who knew? FHA was also available for non-vets. This brought major changes to the area of town. Many locals will remember some of these new businesses from that time. Where the hangars were, that was kind of where about where Earl Scheib was, that became a Firestone tire store now, close to where the airport is, where the 405 is. And Mayfair Market, when I was a kid, I always remember people saying, oh, Mayfair was where the airport was. And Mayfair Market, which is now Big Lots, and the bowling alley was built. I don't know if everybody remembers the Jefferson Bowl, but the bowling alley is where the Dollar Tree and the closed orchard is. Lots of local businesses and restaurants were opened at that time. And of course, our world famous Joe Petrelli's restaurant, which started as the Airport Cafe. And here's a funny story. It started closer to the airport. And then in the middle of the night, Joe picked up his building somehow and took it across the street to Sepulveda, where it ended up next door to where Shakey's is today. So, talking with Marie and Sophie, they have said many a times, we are almost exactly back to where we originally were. So, they are kind of almost about where they were if the field was there. So, I guess many of my friends who say that they think they live in Sunkissed Park on top of an airport, I would have to say, depending on the street, yes, you do. Many Hollywood directors, including Cecil B. DeMille, who owned his own airport, Sidney and Charles Chaplin, reached for the skies, writing scenes into their scripts to shoot daring aerials, which brought huge audiences into theaters, including our local aviator, Howard Hughes, for Hells Angels. So thank you for letting me present my portion of the program, and I'm going to turn it back over to Clark.
I knew nothing, and especially the whole story with Margaret Perry. It's really incredible. I hope someone writes a bio on her, because it's great.
How about Culver City running into a woman?
Well, yeah, it's incredible. I suppose Mark Wanamaker needs no introduction. but I'm going to do one anyway. I'm sure there's one person here who doesn't know who he is. Mark Wanamaker is a film historian, author, speaker, and teacher who's been involved with film production, exhibition, and research for several decades. He grew up in LA and assisted in the forming of the American Film Institute and the American Cinematheque. Beginning in the 1970s, he assembled what came to be known as Bison Archives, and I'm sure some of the photos you will see here tonight are from his archive. But became known as Bison Archives, an extensive and unique photo archive capturing the history of LA and the film industry, with its name referencing an early film studio, if anyone's curious. The archive has been used by researchers, publishers, the media, and documentary filmmakers over the years. And now part of his archive resides at the Margaret Perry Library, where I work, which is part of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. So without further ado, welcome Mark Wanamaker.
I thought you'd like that. Now, we just heard fantastic, I mean, I knew a little bit about the Culver City Airport, but what I heard tonight about Margaret Perry and all that, I did not know. And it's very exciting to know what was going on in this area. But that's, what she gave us in a vacuum. We focused in on Culver City. But let's go back to Thomas Ince, who was really the pioneer of aviation, would you believe, besides movies, right after World War I. And, but before I get to him, the reason I put this here, and I'll show you a few others, because aviation in Hollywood, right after World War I, it just exploded with interest, all the way through the 30s, right up to World War II. So they had these fashions. That's about 1926 for First National. I know you ladies are going to rush out and get these hats right away. I'm telling you, when I found these, I was laughing my head off. But anyway, the reason I showed you that is that the aviation industry exploded after World War I. Now, up until that time, there was a lot of aviation going on in Los Angeles, and there were the early fields. We're talking in the late 19th century, in the 1890s, would you believe, in the early 20th century, with ballooning. First was ballooning, and Roy Kanabashu, that was his name. He was ballooning in downtown LA in 1903. But the movie industry and aviation, which is depicted in my book, The Early Hollywood Aviators, basically starts with the Wright brothers. Now, the Wright brothers, as we know, 1903, and starting the first flights. Would you believe by 1905 and 1906, already there were cameramen filming the Wright brothers? So the footage we see of the Wright brothers flying was shot by, not Hollywood cameramen, we didn't have Hollywood yet, but by cameramen, the film industry. This is fascinating to me because the birth of aviation is in a way the birth of the movie industry, moving pictures. Now remember I gave you my lecture last time about the trains in Hollywood. They were already using trains in 1898 to shoot these moving pictures with the train coming into the station. Well, it was just natural you'd have airplanes landing right in front of you. So I'm telling you, the 20th century and the technology just burst onto the scene after the 1900. And again, movie making thought this was very romantic and exciting for stunting and all this kind of thing. And one of the first people here in Los Angeles to be interested in movies and commercial use of airplanes and everything is Thomas Ince. Oh, let me go back to Burdett Field. Now, I know that we don't have 4 more hours, sorry, but I gave Hope about 134 pictures, which I dumped on her. And So we decided that, well, she decided, rightfully so. Let's just talk about the overview and a few of the airfields we never even heard of, like Burdett Field, 94th and Western Avenue in Inglewood. Did you ever hear of that one? No, but this is where the black cats. Remember that shot that Hope showed you of the men on the plane, you know, and they're all going like this? They would have these sweaters that says black cats on them. Now, Reginald Denny, who I have a friend that's her grandfather, we did a book about Reginald Denny. He was a famous actor, not the guy that got beaten up during the riot, no. This is Reginald Denny, who was a famous actor at MGM for many years, and he developed model airplanes, and he had a store on Hollywood Boulevard. He's the one that invented the drone airplane. Now, how did this come about? This came about after World War I. He was a World War I British pilot as 19 years old. And he was shot down over the channel. He was almost killed. Matter of fact, his face was burned. He had to have special surgeries. His mouth was like crooked. And they used to say, oh God, that's sexy. His mouth is crooked, you know, or something. So Universal found him and made him a big star at Universal. Eventually, later on, was MGM and other studios. But he invented the drone. Why? Because in the early 20s, after World War I, Hollywood was the center for the stunt pilots that were originally, like William Wellman, original pilots of World War I. And one of them was Ormer Locklear, who was very important. And Ormer was making a film in 1920, The Sky Women. His girlfriend was Viola Dana, and we interviewed her for the Hollywood series years ago. And she told the story of how he was flying. It was a World War I picture at the Demille field, which I will show you in a few minutes, at night. And he told the men on the ground with the spotlights to shut the spotlights when he does that leaf, what do you call that? Leaf barrel drop, when you're turning and going like this. And they forgot to shut the lights, and he crashed right in front of everyone, was killed. Just like that, what's his name who was killed? Baker. Same thing, exactly the same thing. Viola, when she did the interview, she was crying. Like 80 years later, she's still crying about it. How can you not? But so Reginald Denny thought, why waste these pilots' lives making films? It's too dangerous to do this. So he developed model airplanes to do it. And that's the beginning of the remote, control airplanes, which are toys now. Everybody uses them now. But he invented this, and eventually Northrop Grumman took it and modernized it till they weaponized it. And not just weapons, but for aerial photography all around the world. And that's what we have today, the drone, thanks to Reginald Denny, World War I, and movies. It's quite interesting how this is all intertwined. So Burdett Field was where the Black Cats were. There was a private field. A guy named Burdett owned it, as I said, 94th and Western Avenue. And this was so typical because the reason I'm going to tell you now that we're not going to spend 4 more hours, because I counted at least 50 fields around Southern California. 50. All over the place. Everywhere. And we're talking about 1910 for Mr. Brand, and the Brand, 1912 is when he built the Brand field near his house, with the Brand Library in Glendale. And he had the first air meets there. There's a whole book on it. There's an Arcadia book all about the air meets there at the Brand Field. Isn't that interesting? So over the years, there was one in Griffith Park. There was one, the Burdett Field here. We have Clover Field. We have now the Culver City Field. We've got, and others. Oh, the LA Metropolitan Airport, Burbank Airport, Glendale Airport, and others. Okay? So let's move on. Oh, whoops, excuse me. Moving on too quickly. Now, this is the corner. Let me get my bearings here. Let's see now. We're looking north. Okay, these are the Hollywood Hills. So this is Fairfax Avenue, running from Wilshire down here, straight up, right up to Fairfax High. And this is 6th Street, is right here. 6th and Fairfax. Yes, May Company, yes, the Park La Brea, and blah, blah, blah. So Cecil B. Demille, close friend of Thomas Ince. We're going to go back to Thomas Ince, right? We're going to intertwine them. Now, right after World War I, Thomas Ince built the Thomas Ince Field, which I don't have a picture of right now because there's just too many to look at, which was in Venice, right next to the Venice canals. We've shown it in other programs that we did. And he was there, and he paid for the first intercontinental air race in 1919, right after World War I. I think it was, what was the amount on the check? $25,000, I think. You remember? I think it was $25,000 or something like that for the award. That's a lot of money in 1919, right? And I have to check, actually, because I'm the not curator, I'm the steward of the Thomas Ince archives. It took me many years to get there, and Nancy Ince died just last year, and she was the granddaughter of Thomas Ince. And I gave to the society the picture of George Washington, which hung by Harry Culver's office at the beginning of Culver City, and was at the Ince studio when they opened the Ince studio, which is of course, Selznick Studios, we know it. And she had it sitting there up in her ranch way up north all these years, and finally it should be back in Culver City, which it is now. So anyway, to go back to this, so he developed this aviation going on. D.H. DeLay, which is another stunt pilot, which I co-wrote the book with D.H. DeLay's granddaughter, Shauna Kelly. And all of these people, and all the people that Hope mentioned, were all in bed together. In other words, it was a club. All these people knew each other. They all were interested in aviation, in commercial aviation, aviation used in movies, and aviation, of course, in general, for transportation in general. They were all pioneers. Isn't it interesting how it's the movie people, and who took it from the Wright brothers, literally to help develop and finance all the commercial aviation that we know today, including Howard Hughes, of course, with TWA. So it just amazes me how much information there is on this subject. And that's why I'm glad you wanted to do this. So look at this. Look at all the people that came out for this air meet, which is, at the Demille Field. Now, what about Chaplin? What does Chaplin have to do with it? It's not Charlie Chaplin, it's Sidney Chaplin. Sidney Chaplin was the business manager of Charlie Chaplin, his older brother. He got interested with Demille. Demille and the Chaplins were like this, very close. And so was William Randolph Hearst. They were all close to each other. It was William Randolph Hearst's best friend was Charlie Chaplin, which is interesting. Marion Davies and the Beach House, which I'm one of the historians of, the Edinburgh Beach House. What's left of the estate there is the Beach House, is just the little building that's there where we have a little museum. But the swimming pool is the original pool that was there. And there was a giant 5-story mansion, a white mansion, on the beach on Santa Monica. If you look at my aerial shots from miles out, you see, the Palisade Cliffs and the Beach House. It just stuck there, this giant thing. And what is that? That was the biggest mansion in Santa Monica's history, is the Hearst, the Marion Davies Beach House. They were all interested in aviation as well. Now, who was their other friends involved? Douglas Fairbanks and Mary Pickford, of course. Mary Pickford is one of the first women who knew Margaret Perry and knew of them, who owned her own plane. I wouldn't be surprised if she flew out of that airport. I think she probably did. Now, she did fly out of the Chaplin and Demille airports because, they were close. But they all flew out of each other's airports. And they all had airports. Now, what was Demille's interest? And Sidney was interested in creating an airline to Catalina, which he did do. And it was Nancy Ince who married Dick Probert. Dick Probert was a stunt pilot and goes way back to the silent era. And I knew Dick died at 106. He was an incredible guy, and they formed Avalon Airways that flew to Culver City, that flew out of Long Beach to Catalina for 30-something years. And by the way, Nancy was the first, this is Thomas Ince's granddaughter, mind you. She was the first stewardess on the plane, and she was a costume designer and all. She designed her stewardess uniform. It was the cutest thing you ever saw in your life. With little anchors on there, the cute little hat. And my God, she looked great. Her mother was Nancy Drexel, actress at Fox Films, who married Thomas Ince, one of his 3 sons. You see how this all is incestuous, right?
Right.
All right, let's go back to Sydney now. He ran the airline. Eventually, the airline going to Catalina was taken over by Dick Probert and Nancy. See what I mean? So now, what was Demille doing out here? Demille started Mercury Aviation in 1919, right at the same time as Ince was doing his airline, his transcontinental trips. They were buying metal airplanes at this time. They were all, Jennies were made out of like wire and canvas. They were building serious planes made out of metal, light metal, of course, aluminum, etc., etc. So he wanted to fly the mail, the U.S. mail, and they wouldn't give him the contract. This was right after World War I. The Army, the United States government thought, we'll have the Army do it. Why should we pay him and make him a partner? And they just let him on until he went bankrupt. He tried to fly the mail in Mexico in 1921. Didn't happen. Guess what? By 1923 and 4, the government let private people fly the mail. He was so angry with DeMille, I can't tell you. See, I worked with the DeMille estate to still do all these years. So I have all the original stock certificates for Mercury Aviation, all these pictures of them, and all of this going on. And you see how popular all this was happening. While all of what I just told you is happening, they're making films, of course. And they're going on about it. So this is Mercury when he was trying to advertise it. It says Mercury Aviation, pioneers in commercial aviation, Demille Field, Hollywood, Wilshire Boulevard, and I think it's Crescent Avenue. Oh, that's Crescent Heights, excuse me. Look at on the ground shot here. Those are the Hollywood Hills right up there. Look at the people that came out for these events. And it's just amazing to me what's going on. There is DeMille himself with his plane. Look how happy. They love this. God. I have a great picture of Mary Pickford with her plane. They were all close to Sid Grauman, who manipulated all this into publicity. And they brought her plane to the Chinese theater in 1927 for the opening, film Their Wings. And she's standing there in her aviatrix outfit next to her plane in the forecourt of the Chinese theater. There again, he's posing. So you see how I mean is that Thomas Ince, Cecil B. DeMille, even Sidney Chaplin and others were all interested in the creation of a commercial aviation services, entertainment using aviation, using them, live entertainment, the wing walking and all that stuff. And of course, remember the Waldo Pepper, remember the great film with Robert Redford. It's about these guys after World War I. And there have been several other films that have been made. Flyboys. You gotta get Flyboys. That was made by, what's his name now? Young producer, he lives in Venice today. It depicts the Americans already in World War I flying, and after when they come back and all this stuff, what they did after that. They used their skills. About these photographs, this one particular one says Spence on the bottom left there. Right there. Spence. Mr. Spence was one of these pilots, and he was a photographer. So during World War I, he developed the ways of aerial photography in Europe, came back with these special cameras and everything, and started shooting Los Angeles starting right in 1919. It's rare to find a lot of early shots between 1919 and 1921, but I bought several collections of Spence from 1921 up until 1930 something, and then Fairchild took over from World War II, aerial photography, and I have these great collections in Bison Archives that show the city. And what did they show? the studios, my specialty, of course. The development of it, and Culver City, development of Culver City, showing nothing in Culver City. 1921 is my earliest shots, but it does show the Goldwyn studio, which was the Thomas Ince studio, which is MGM, of course, Sony. And of course, the Roach studio, which was something before that, and of course, the Ince studio became the, Archeopathe, and I have great aerials of the 40 acres. How do you think we got them? Mr. Spence shot them. Thank you, Mr. Spence. Now, finally, Demille moved on to other things. Everybody moved on. A friend of theirs, Mr. Rogers, took over this field, and he ran it to about 1930. But by that time, the Wilshire Miracle Mile was starting, the development of the area of Fairfax, and all this, so they moved it away. They moved out. And this is the beginning. It says Rogers Airport, the center of West Coast Airways. They still tried to keep this going, but it just didn't happen. That was 1921, you see, the date of this. And look at this. Airplane passenger flights. See California from the air, Rogers Airport, that's a ticket, costs $5. Crescent and Wilshire Boulevard, that's Crescent Heights. New Pacific Standard, 2 passenger planes. It shows you where where you are here. Here's Wilshire and Fairfax. And it just, look what's happening right here.
Right.
There's no way they're going to keep this going. Clover Field, as we saw in the other pictures there, very important, 1925, Santa Monica's airport, barely still there. There's a lot of people want it gone, as you know. So anyway, a lot of films were shot there, and they had air races going from Clover Field. Clover Field was fantastic, and you know it from the eucalyptus trees, was a windbreak. Remember, eucalyptus trees throughout the whole basin, since the Rancho days, were put in for windbreaks for their fields, so the fields don't blow away. Now, why they didn't do this in the Midwest during the Dust Bowl, don't ask me. They mismanaged their properties. No, that's true. They mismanaged them. They didn't use their farming correctly. You're supposed to keep the soil, topsoil.
Native grasses.
Yeah, native grasses. Many mistakes. Yeah, anyway. Now this is just a typical one here, Clover. This is an early 1924 comedy. I think it was in Educational Studios. Educational Studio was in Hollywood. They did not make educational films. Why? They started doing it. That's where they kept the name. It was all comedies, educational comedies. Don't ask me. This is one of them. This is at the field. Educational Pictures. Hello Hollywood is the title. It says, get in, we won't shoot you till you're up in the air. Oh boy. I forgot what her name is, but anyway, she was brave. Cloverfield also used here for Air Circus 1928. I'm just giving you just a tiny bit. I have amassed now in archives, it's like almost a file cabinet now, of all the films that were made, aviation films. Why? Because I have 2 friends that are writing books on the subject, which I could never compete with them. They're crazy, okay? They literally, one book, no, that's not his name. I know another guy doing books on railroads and films. In other words, they show every single film used in railroading, every single film used in aviation. He's now doing a book, everything relating to military films, like war films and all this. The other one before that was everything, comedies, and they used all these fields throughout all of Southern California. Now, one of the most other important ones is Glendale Central Airport. Now, I am proud to say that some of my pictures are used in the restoration by Disney of the Glendale Central Airport. And I found in the location department, the reason I got a lot of these pictures, to remind you, I worked in all the research libraries at the studios all through the late 70s and 80s, on and off, of course. And in the mid-80s, late 80s, they wanted to get, the studios were disenchanted with their research libraries. They would tell us, How does the research library make us money? And we have to tell them. We support the departments at the studios, like the prop department. The prop department would come to us, we need to make a prop from ancient Egypt, or we have books on all this in ancient Egypt, or Babylon, or in New York police departments. You know, in 1921, or I was asked recently, because of the Archaeo Research Library, which I saved and sold to Francis Coppola, which he has now. And by the way, Francis Coppola now has the Warner Library and the MGM Research Library saved. Thank you. Lucas saved the Universal Library and the Paramount Research Library. And the Goldwyn Library is now online now and protected. So, but still we worried about the 20th Century Fox Research Library. That's still not protected yet. So what's in the libraries? All the research to make props, to make costumes, to make everything. So that's where I got my collection from. So they have location photos. The location departments, which were disbanded, gave all their pictures and stuff, if they didn't throw them away, to the research libraries, which I got them. Now I didn't get them all, but I got a good share of them. I must have gotten 30,000, 40,000 images on locations all over the United States, let alone Southern California. So look at this. These are shots of the interiors. I'm just going to show you a few. And exteriors, showing you what it looked like. So that's how we restored the building. They knew what was missing on the building. They knew how it looked, and that helped. And look at this shot. It shows the whole thing. It shows the whole complex and the runway. All this is gone now. This is now a street. This is accessible. This is a street. I was just there and I shot. They let me shoot the whole property just, I think, in 2020. In color, I might add. And look at this. This is where you see many films, when they get off the plane, they go into the terminal here. 1956. It's a beautiful airport. The train stations were similar in the design of Spanish colonial and all. So of course in my book I cover a lot of the Hollywood Trains and Trolleys book. It's a lot about that. But the new book coming out on aviation, they don't really cover the airports too much. It's mostly films. It would be nice to see maybe a book on all these airports. I'm not sure if there is one. I don't think there is.
There's an opportunity.
And look at, this is Hughes. Now we'll jump to Hughes. Now remember, Howard Hughes, let's go back to him and Thomas Ince and Hell's Angels. You showed Hell's Angels. That's 1929, 1930. Let's go way back to Howard Hughes. Howard Hughes came out and was interested already in aviation in 1921. He was just a young kid. So by 1924, when he was older and he had more money, he met with every major film mogul in Hollywood. Who was the main mogul he met with that he just loved and that he was loved back was Carl Laemmle of Universal. Carl Laemmle was Uncle Carl. Why was he Uncle Carl? He was Uncle Carl to everybody in Hollywood. All the, not just actors, we're talking all the moguls. He was one of the earliest pioneers of the film industry. He's the one that brought Universal out in 1912, but he was already out here in 1909 with the IMP company, the Independent Motion Picture Company. And he was involved with the formation of Universal, which is the Bison Film Company, and the New York Motion Picture Company of Keystone brand. So he was here forming the early industry in Los Angeles with the Nestor Film Company, the first studio in Hollywood. They were at Gower and Sunset. So get this. Howard Hughes goes to him because he knows everything about how to start to make a film, particularly an aviation film. Because all of these companies on the East Coast, West Coast were employing already aviation in their film titles, and particularly in their serials. Now, I want you to listen to my podcast. Just go on. It's called The History of Hollywood with Mark Wanamaker. It's on all platforms. Just shoot it in there and you'll see. The latest one is called, I think the title is Pioneering Female Action Heroes of the Silent Era. And who do I cover? I cover Florence Lawrence, Ruth Rowland, Emily Gibson, and others who all flew planes. And where did they learn to fly them? From people like Perry and her schools. I mean, this is where these women learn, and on the East Coast as well, of course. So all of this with pioneering women and pioneering film industry, pioneering aviation in the industry, and everything else surrounding it. You see how intertwined this is. It blows my mind how I can try to. I learned a lot tonight. I can't know everything. So Howard Hughes is already making his first picture, 1927. He made several pictures. I don't have the titles. I can't even look right now at it. It was, Two Arabian Nights, something with the fly, something. He did about 3 or 4 of these pictures before Hell's Angels. I have pictures of him on the set in 1928, already learning how to direct film, but how to direct an aviation film. He employed the best stuntman from World War I, and they all worked for Howard Hughes, culminating, of course, in Howard Hughes wanting to develop special airplanes, the FX-14, whatever that was.
XL11.
That was it?
The XL11.
11. And of course the Spruce Goose. And where he needed a proper airfield to do all this development in, chose Culver City, of course. He knew Harry Culver, he knew Thomas Ince, he knew all these people. He was part of the group. And in The Aviator, in the script that was written with DiCaprio, there are scenes in which DiCaprio comes to the Ambassador Hotel, which I helped design in my research in the film. You did the props for it, I did the overall look of what the Ambassador of Coconut Grove looked like. But the point is that he came there looking for cameras, if you remember that scene. And they said, we're already using cameras in 3 other aviation pictures. We can't just give you all of our cameras, and they're arguing about this. Well, this was typical. They were doing aviation pictures all over that place. And he wanted every camera. He wanted every plane. He wanted everybody. And this was, wow. So anyway, make a long story short, he buys this land here, the La Bayona wetlands area, Playa del Rey, and builds one of the longest runways. What's his name again? His right-hand man, Howard Hughes. Remember, he said this was the longest.
Dietrich?
What? Dietrich. Noah Dietrich, which I wish I met. I knew the archivist for Hughes. I know them very well, but never met Dietrich. I mean, it was before my time. So look at this massive thing that he built there. And they started building more and more, and they started to build these planes there. So look at the employees. Look at this. Look at this. This is a major airport on the edge of Culver City that most people don't know it existed. Like, if the Culver City airport is not remembered, this is not becoming remembered either. But look what's going on here. This is serious business. The same time he's doing this, we're talking 1930s, 40s, 50s, during World War II and all, the Burbank, Lockheed took over the Central Airport over there, which is now the Hollywood Airport. And they were building airplanes. This was an airplane town during World War II, as we all probably know, many of us know. And they employed thousands and thousands of people. And one little side note, back to Reginald Denny. During the war, he was building his model planes, his drones. The government bought many of the patents, shared with him in patents on these drones. And to make a long story short, he was still making the model planes. So guess who was one of his employees making these model planes at his factory? I forgot where his factory was, on the edge of LA. Her name was, what's Marilyn Monroe's original name again? Norma Jean. And I have pictures of her making a model plane in his plant. So I'm telling you, Hollywood industry, even Marilyn Monroe, gosh, is making model planes, is involved in aviation in some way or another. But look at this. This is a serious airport.
Right.
Look at all the people there. Those are employees parked in the parking lots. This is an amazing thing. Howard Hughes was an amazing person. I'll tell you one quick story. Let me just show you a little bit here. That's the famous shot of the Spruce Goose coming out. I have a picture of myself in this plane when it was down in Long Beach, because you could go into the cockpit, you get the fedora, And you put the fedora on, and you sit where Hughes is sitting there and turning around. I have me sitting there and turning around. I'm part of this history. It's weird. And there it is. There's the XF-100. Now, the crash and that's what I'm getting to now, quickly. I'm almost done. Don't worry. You heard about the crash. He was testing this, and he crashes into Beverly Hills into a house. And luckily, nobody was in that house, which is something. Right on Whittier. Right on Whittier Drive there in Sunset, right around there. Well, I happen to know, I didn't know Hughes, but my mother knew his doctor. My father was a doctor. And he was going to a bone cancer doctor. Why? Because he was kept quiet. He broke almost every bone in his body. How he lived through this is, again, it's like a miracle to keep him going somehow. And he had developed bone cancer. He developed other side effects from all of this. He was a very sick man. He was afraid to get sick with a normal cold, like I just got over. For me, it's easy. But for him, it could be catastrophic. As you know, people have these morbidities. That's why he was crazed about cleanliness. And as time went on, his brain wasn't functioning right. He was under drugs and all kinds of other things. That's why he went to the Mormons. He wanted more of a homeopathic way of living. So when he moved as a recluse to Las Vegas, people ridiculed him for this. He looked horrible. Remember that film about him picking up some guy in Las Vegas in the desert? And it was played, and he was emaciated and all this stuff. That's why. It's from this crash. All right. Let's go on. Okay, yeah, the Venice field, which is basically part of the Thomas Ince field. The Venice had their own airplane patrol, air patrol. And I only have a couple pictures. D.H. DeLay, which I told you about in the book, they helped form this patrol, and it says on the side of the plane, because I'm with the Venice Historical Society as well. Excuse me, that was a Freudian slip. We have the airplane that says Venice Police on it. You might have seen it in some of the Venice books. And I'm bringing that up now because I have my meeting. I have a Friday meeting at 1 o'clock. I'm back on the beach. Are you familiar with Back on the Beach, everybody? It's right by the Edinburgh Beach House. It's a wonderful restaurant run by Fred, who owned it for many years, still there. And the food is excellent, and you sit right on the sand, right there. It is glorious, especially when I like to get out from West Hollywood and come there every Friday and just relax at the beach. See, I grew up in West Hollywood, but I grew up at the beach. I was a junior lifeguard in Santa Monica. I worked on the POP pier. I made food. I ran the trip to the Mars. If you remember that. I was a fisherman. I went off Malibu Pier, Santa Monica Pier. There used to be fishing boats, if you remember. Yeah. Used to go out and fish, deep sea fish there. I spent time on the beach just recreating. I rode my bike up and down the coast. I kind of grew up there. It's very emotional to me to be there. So you understand that when we talk about the piers, that we show that picture of the piers, man, all those piers, most of them were gone at the time, and except Santa Monica Pier. Remember, they wanted to get rid of Santa Monica Pier. Remember, one of the great storms was going to knock it down. Yeah. And then, of course, Ocean Park Pier and POP Pier ends up burning, and then they want to get rid of that, and we tried to save that, but there's no way anybody would come to its rescue, and it was removed. God, it hurts. Remember the Avalon Ballroom? Oh, yeah. Right, and all these ballrooms that they had there. I was a musician. I played the Avalon Ballroom as a kid. There was a club there called the Cheetah. I remember the Cheetah. So all of this, Culver City, Santa Monica, and Venice is all intertwined, as we all know, and all intertwined with aviation as well. And we want to talk about the end, pretty much, is Mines Fields. which is LA Airport. I wouldn't leave you without talking about LA Airport. It was Minesfield. It was purchased by LA City early on, 28, I think it was. Eventually, an airport was built there by 1930. And there it is. There's the LA Airport. These are protected buildings now. They're landmarks, plaqued. I remember, believe it, I'm going to date myself again. I remember it as a kid, this airport. We would fly out of there. These are vintage shots, by the way, I'm showing you right now. You see this before they landscaped or anything. Where do these come from? Location apartments at the studios, of course. Mr. Mines was the one that bought, he was a real estate guy, he got the property, LA City got it from him, it was Mines Field for a while. And here's 1931, the TWA, Tri-Motor Mail Carrier. Now, the reason I bring this up, almost done, I consider myself a TWA pioneer kid. How did I know Howard Hughes, who was TWA? No. I flew in 1958, I think it was 58 or 9, the first international flight in the TWA, what was it called again, the plane? It was the Constellation, thank you, to London, England, stopping in Goose Bay, Labrador. I have a certificate, Mark Wanamaker, flying his first maiden flight. So I am a TWA kid, as well as a Hollywood kid. And I think that's it, right? Yeah. So anyway, there you go.
Fabulous talk. Just your enthusiasm and your love for the city is just
The Avalon Ballroom, was that turned into the Cheetah? I remember that.
Yes, the Avalon Ballroom on the Ocean Park Pier. Aragon. The other was Santa Monica Pier. The Aragon Ballroom became the Cheetah. And that's where, I think, where Lawrence Welk was, correct? Yep. And he was there. And Spade Cooley was there. By the way, in the film, they don't shoot horses, don't they? They shoot horses, don't they? Was supposedly publicity shot at the Aragon. And I thought it was. I have pictures of the making of it, showing them inside this place. And guess what? Thanks to the location set department that I got stuff, I found all the stills from the inside. It was all at Warner Brothers Studio. So the location department went there, shot the whole damn thing. That's why I have pictures of it. But they didn't shoot it there. They shot a couple exteriors, went back to Warner, shot the whole picture at Warner Brothers on the stage, which was very disappointing for me. Yes?
How do we access Bison archives?
Well, Bison basically is a private archive, but if you're working on a project, all you have to do is go to my website, and you'll email me if you want something, and I will probably find it if I have it. That's high access. Any other questions? Yes. But this gentleman here.
Mark, I was under the impression at one point that the Hughes Airport kind of predates the LAX as we know it, as being a primary place for people to fly into Los Angeles before LAX.
I think it was pretty much private.
Hughes
It was never a commercial airport.
Never commercial.
Oh, you know why you heard that? It rivaled LAX.
Yeah.
It rivaled it. Oh, that LA airport I showed you pictures of.
Right.
It was not a commercial airport.
Okay.
Yes.
What about the Hawthorne Airport? That I know was
Hawthorne
the
is not
Norfolk
far
Grumman.
away. Very important airport in Hawthorne. And that was there in the 20s as well. It's one of the many that I bring up that was in this whole area. It's just, we'd be here all night. And I do have pictures of many of these airports, believe it or not. Yes.
Which of those airports were associated with the aircraft manufacturers? So
Yeah.
Culver,
Thank you, that's right. Oh, yes, let me that's right. McDonnell Douglas started at the former Herman movie studio on Wilshire Boulevard in Santa Monica. I forgot what the cross street is. It was a movie studio, Herman. They made comedies there, but they didn't last long. And Douglas took over the big sound stage. Well, it's not a sound stage, silent stage. But they made it into the McDonnell Douglas on Wilshire, and then I had to move out of there, of course.
Just Douglas will be
Douglas, yeah. Thanks for bringing that up.
1940 to 1973.
Yeah. But Herman, we're talking 1920, I forgot when that was, 27 or 8. I have pictures of it when they just moved in. So you can see the movie studio aerial shot, and you can see some airplanes out there where they used to make the movies in the back lot. And this is interesting, again, remember Hope brought up that these actors, Clark Gable and Jimmy Stewart and many others, I have 20 stars from the silent and sound eras owning their own planes, including Tom Mix, Buck Jones, Ken Maynard, doing Western aviation pictures. Yes. Now, I'm telling you right now that their horses were not in the plane. Okay? But I'll tell you, I talked to Gene Autry years ago, I interviewed him, and he was making a picture, and he said he had to be in New York with a horse at Madison Square Garden for one of those big shows they were doing. And he only had 2 days to get there. He was going to go on the train. He was having dinner with the head of TWA. And he says, I'll take care of it. So the horse, it was not just Champion, it was other horses too. They had a special plane developed in one day, 1 week. No, 1 day. What am I talking about? They made stalls in there and everything, and they flew those horses to Madison Square Garden in time. He loved to tell that story. Oh yes, and other stars, that's right. Mary Pickford, I said, she was one of the first to own her own plane and fly. But there were others, Ruth Rowland, as I mentioned, and others. That's why I want you to hear my podcast on these action women, because I do talk about them flying and who they were. Florence Lawrence. There were many. I only chose 4. I only had 15 minutes. It's 15-minute little readings with sound effects and whatever. But I'm going to do many more on women. I'm right now working on women cowgirls. Who are these cowgirls who worked for Thomas Ince 1912? They came from the Wild West shows. They were these Annie Oakleys. We only hear about Annie Oakley. These women were Annie Oakley was earlier, it's true, late 19th century. But the ones that followed Annie Oakley into the 20th century, we haven't heard of them. They were better shots than Annie Oakley, I swear. There was this one girl, I can't remember her name. She was a better shot, better rider, better everything, but she worked for the Pawnee Bill Wild West show. Who heard of him? Nobody. So she never made it. She worked for Buffalo Bill. Buffalo Bill made Annie Oakley, how we know her today, playing for the Queen Victoria and all this stuff. So I'm doing a project on that, and I just found some new shots. And also my friend's book just came out. I forgot the title, but it's about forgotten Native Americans in films. I knew Jay Silverheels personally, so what I'm trying to say is my enthusiasm comes finding the lost, forgotten people like Perry and others who worked in the film industry or around it or whatever, who should be recognized. And I'll leave you on one last note on that subject is Red Wing. How many of you have heard of Princess Red Wing? Princess Red Wing starred in the first Bison films. That's how I know all about her, and I have pictures of it. Bison Company was the second film company to come to Los Angeles in 1909. The first one was the Selig Polyscope Company, who hired Tom Mix in these early days. So then came, of course, it was Red Wing then, from 1909 to 1910. She was with Bison, and then she left there, went to Pathé, Westerns. This is all in Edendale, North Los Angeles, Glendale Boulevard, where the 2 freeway comes down. And that's where the Keystone Studio was. That was what Hollywood was before Hollywood. And then, in 1913, Cecil B. DeMille hired her to play in The Squaw Man, the first feature-length Western made in Hollywood, Los Angeles, Hollywood particularly. That's The Squaw Man, that's the Hollywood Heritage Museum, which I'm one of the founders of. That whole Lasky DeMille barn across from the Hollywood Bowl, which I you should visit someday. We're open only Friday, Saturday, Sundays now, I think, for a while. But that is the birthplace of Hollywood history. And you see how Demille comes into this with American Indians in the films and aviation, and I mean, it's mind-blowing, I say. Oh, one of my podcasts coming up soon is about Noble Johnson, the first black company in LA, the Lincoln Motion Picture Company. So we're gonna link all these people. They all should get their recognition now. Any other questions? Before we have, it's about midnight now?